When I was 10 years old, I desperately wanted to be a goth. In fact, I remember wanting to be a devil worshipper. Now, I didn't know what a devil worshipper was, or a goth, really, for that matter. We all made cringeworthy choices in our preteen years, and this was mine. Devil worship, to my 10-year-old mind, was akin to being edgy. So to achieve my aims, I wore baggy trousers with a chain, persuaded my mum to buy me some black lipstick, which she promptly hid from me, and, most embarrassingly of all, I had heard of Slipknot, but thought it was like a concept rather than a band, so I would use it as an adjective, like, oh cool, that spiky bracelet is so Slipknot. Cringe aside, I look back at that time fondly. I was experimenting with my identity as I approached my teenage years, and I wanted to go against the norm, to be edgy and different and moody. As I grew older, I decided the chains, baggy jeans, and devil worship weren't for me. But I certainly carry with me the torch of challenging norms that my little pseudo-gothy devil self set aflame. And there's a big part of me that's obsessed with and charmed by the unnerving, the unsettling, the spookiness that being a goth represented to me back in the day. I love horror as a genre. I play lots of horror games and watch plenty of horror films, but as a child, my main memory of being captivated by horror was reading this book, which is a game book where you roll dice and fight monsters, and I still haven't actually completed it without cheating. They're pretty challenging. Now, this book is classic haunted house vibes, right? You've got winding passages, rooms filled with stock characters from ghostly maidens and vampiric lords to creepy butlers and hooded cultists. It's replete with those recognisable classic horror tropes like half-scrolled notes, dungeon cells, traps, thunder and lightning, castles, ghosts, murder, all set against the backdrop of an ancient house under a dark night sky. But these incredibly familiar stock tropes go a lot further back than the House of Hell, believe it or not. And so does the practice of deliberately indulging in literature designed to frighten and thrill. My love of horror, my innate childhood desire to be a goth, despite not really knowing what that meant, is the result of a long literary tradition, dating back as far as the 18th century and terrifying readers ever since. What books led to this book? What is the Gothic? You've probably experienced a thrill, a feeling of excitement, or even delight over something unsettling at some point or another, right? So why do so many of us glean feelings of pleasure from terror? The year is 1757. For context, that's just over 140 years after the death of Shakespeare and just under 20 years before the birth of the USA. A man named Edmund Burke, MP and philosopher, publishes a treatise that would influence literature and art for decades to come. Burke's A Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful argued a lot of things, but it's often cited, as the title suggests, as the originating text that defined the sublime and placed it in opposition to the beautiful. The sublime is key to understanding the Gothic, and in the 18th century it meant something specific. Today you might use the word sublime to mean incredibly good, like, oh, that cake is absolutely sublime, meaning very, very high quality, but it meant something very different 265 years ago, and this is where Burke's definition comes in. According to Burke, if something is beautiful, it causes a relaxation in the body, produces the passion of love in the mind. The sublime, by contrast, has a bit more edge. As Burke writes, whatever is fitted in any sort to excite the ideas of pain and danger, that is to say, whatever is in any sort terrible, or conversant about terrible objects, or operates in a manner analogous to terror, is a source of the sublime. That is, it is productive of the strongest emotion which the mind is capable of feeling. So the sublime is not relaxing or calming, nor does it inspire feelings of love, as the beautiful does. It's our strongest emotional response, and it's grounded in terror. But does that mean feeling the heightened, overwhelming passion of the sublime is a negative experience? Not quite. As Burke goes on to say, indeed, when danger or pain press too nearly, they are incapable of giving any delight and are simply terrible. But at certain distances and with certain modifications, they may be, and they are, delightful. So to feel delight, to feel pleasure in the face of danger or pain, we need distance. Imagine you're looking out over a mountain range. You can see snow-capped peaks tapering into the dark sky, some so high as to be lost in the gathering storm clouds. Dark forests stretching for miles, a fork of lightning flashes on the horizon, and a low rumble of thunder moves closer. The awe The majesty of this scene evokes a feeling of wonder, of amazement. To observe it and be part of it gives pleasure. But if you were, say, hanging from a ledge halfway up one of those mountains about to lose grip, there would be no enjoyment. It would be, as Burke says, simply terrible. The delight would be absent. So our enjoyment, the pleasure we derive, comes from the distance. In the same way that we might enjoy watching a slasher film. But if we were in that scenario with a killer wielding a knife above our heads, we'd experience the terror without the pleasure. But when we get the balance right, not only can we feel pleasure from scenes of terror, but the experience of the sublime can expand and develop the mind. Several years after Burke, in 1773, John and Anna Letitia Aiken published an essay called On the Pleasure Derived from Objects of Terror, in which they described how terror works in a sublime and vigorous imagination to awaken the mind's potential and keep it on the stretch until the soul is elevated to its highest pitch and the pain of terror is lost in amazement. This was a narrative adopted and reworked by the Romantic poets, writing several decades later. Think back to that mountain range. Viewing its awesome majesty and delighting in the thrill it produces not only brings pleasure, but the broadening of the mind and the elevation of the imagination. In this context, terror seems to be subdued, lost. But in the same essay, the Aikenses also discuss our delight in dwelling on objects of pure terror, where our moral feelings are not in the least concerned. This delight is a paradox of the heart, much more difficult of solution. I think the language there is interesting, difficult of solution. The sublime overwhelms our faculty of reason, leaving us incapable of rational thought, meaning there's a danger that morality can go out the window when we enjoy the terrible. For an enlightened 18th century Briton, this paradox constituted an uncomfortable truth. The threat to morality and certainty posed by the sublime needed solving somehow, but this, it would seem, proved impossible. Uncertainty and the potential for utter irrationality was the order of the day. In 1791, William Gilpin wrote that all writers on sublime subjects deal in shadows and obscurity. Many images owe much of their sublimity to their indistinctness, and frequently what we call sublime is the effect of that heat and fermentation which ensues in the imagination from its ineffectual efforts to conceive some dark, obscure idea beyond its grasp. I love this definition, the idea that the sublime can be caused by a fruitless, imaginative straining to conceive of the unknown. This is something Burke addressed too. For him, it was the terrible uncertainty of a thing that generated the fullest emotional force in us. The sublime works within us like a fever of the imagination in which we are gripped into an eternal struggle to grasp the darkness, the uncertainty that we're faced with. Feeling pleasure in the face of terror, being utterly overwhelmed by something, being attracted to the grotesque, the terrible, the uncontrollable, stood in stark contrast to the prevailing 18th century preferences for the controlled and the balanced. These extreme and powerful, sublime feelings weren't really reasonable or sensible things to feel, but people felt them anyway, and sought them out in literature. Enter the Gothic. The Gothic, in literature, is often said to have started with Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, published in 1764. The novel popularised a lot of the tropes of Gothic fiction that would come to define the genre over the next few decades, such as the linking of psychological terror with architectural space, most notably in the form of the creepy castle, or the cruel treatment of the innocent heroine by the rich and powerful big bad patriarch figure. But rather than Walpole, in this series of videos, and to give you a sense of what Gothic fiction really came to represent at the turn of the 19th century, I'm going to draw on the works of the most popular and the best-selling Gothic writer of the period, Anne Radcliffe. Between the years 1789 and 1823, Radcliffe wrote 6 Gothic novels and 1 piece of travel writing, in which she developed her own unique version of sublime terror. Her most famous novel, for which she was paid £500 for the copyright, which is a considerable sum in 1794, equivalent to around £38,000 in today's money, is The Mysteries of Udolpho. Though it wasn't even her most lucrative publication, she sold the copyright for her 1797 novel The Italian for an eye-watering £800. In The Mysteries of Udolpho, you've got a slew of Gothic set pieces, character types and tropes which are wonderfully, still completely recognisable today as representative of the genre of horror. But it's important to point out that Radcliffe actively didn't want her work associated with the term horror. She very clearly preferred the term terror. Nowadays, the distinction between terror and horror might seem difficult to assert, but for Radcliffe there was a clear distinction. and she would write an essay that specifically distinguished the two terms from one another. Terror and horror are so far opposite that the first expands the soul and awakens the faculties to a high degree of life. The other contracts, freezes, and nearly annihilates them. This essay was published posthumously in 1826, but it was probably written a lot earlier, possibly in response to lurid and seemingly sensationalistic Gothic novels like Matthew Lewis's 1796 novel The Monk, which included graphic depictions of incest, rape, violence, and murder. Radcliffe's narratives, following in the tradition of Burke and the sublime and terror as opposed to horror, are characterised by an emphasis upon psychological suspense over bodily gore, by an omnipresent sense of mystery and obscurity over the certainties of fast-paced action, and by mere hints and suggestions of ghostly activity over fully realised manifestations of the supernatural. What has come to be known as Radcliffe's explained supernatural comes into play here. In almost all her writing, Radcliffe would offer a rational explanation for the spooky goings-on in her narratives. Like in a horror film where it's all tense and the suspense builds and the lonely protagonist hears a slow knock at the front door and they grab a knife from the kitchen and brace themselves for attack as they go to open the door expecting a murderer, and it's just, the neighbour wanting to borrow a tea towel or something. Rather than deal in actual ghosts and spirits and evil presences, Radcliffe would give her readers a logical reason to explain where that eerie music was coming from or who that mysterious figure really was. While her writing is frightening and tense, it's not sensationalistic. Now, sometimes the reviewers got this. They would distinguish her work from the writing of someone like Lewis, who relied more on gore and ghosts. But sometimes they didn't, and Radcliffe's work was lumped in with the unabashedly horrifying. Like this reviewer, who complains about the fictions of Mrs. Radcliffe and the horrid dreams of Mr. Lewis, and all the romances of ghosts that my ears are fatigued with. It's likely that this kind of assumption, that sharing a genre must mean a similarity in taste and narrative, led Radcliffe to solidify her definition of terror and its distinction from the horror espoused by writers like Lewis. But back to the Mysteries of Udolpho, the story of Emily, a sensible, sensitive, reasonable, forthright, emotional and morally sound young woman who loses her parents and is eventually kidnapped by the evil Montoni and sequestered in the castle of Udolpho in the Italian mountain range, the Apennines. She's in love with a man named Valancourt, and he loves her too, though they're separated for a big chunk of the novel. With the aid of various characters, she must escape Udolpho and uncover clues about her family's mysterious past. I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to spoil the story, which you should definitely read, because it truly does hold up in terms of suspense. Before I read any Radcliffe, I was prepared to be like, yeah, clever, I see what you did there, but I saw it coming, these tropes are obviously so well worn. But I was actually very much engrossed at every turn of Emily's tale, and there were plenty of terrifying spectacles and twists that I didn't see coming. So, how are those classic Gothic tropes presented in The Mysteries of Udolpho? Firstly, we've got the sublime and terrifying setting, the castle itself. The following is a description of Emily's first encounter with this castle, the site of so many of her woes. Now, unfortunately, nobody's made a The Mysteries of Udolpho film or game yet, so I was thinking, what's the best visual representation of a Gothic castle to show you here? So, please enjoy these clips of Forsaken Castle Cainhurst from Bloodborne. Emily gazed with melancholy awe upon the castle, which she understood to be Montoni's. For though it was now lighted up by the setting sun, the Gothic greatness of its features and its mouldering walls of dark grey stone rendered it a gloomy and sublime object. As she gazed, the light died away on its walls, leaving a melancholy purple tint, which spread deeper and deeper as the thin vapour crept up the mountain, while the battlements above were still tipped with splendour. From those too, the rays soon faded, and the whole edifice was invested with the solemn duskiness of evening. Silent, lonely and sublime, it seemed to stand the sovereign of the scene and to frown defiance on all who dared to invade its solitary reign. As the twilight deepened, its features became more awful in obscurity, and Emily continued to gaze till its clustering towers were alone seen rising over the tops of the woods, beneath whose thick shade the carriages soon after began to ascend. Doesn't this feel like such a common setup? I think the Bloodborne footage attests to that. It's literally a protagonist arriving at an imposing, sprawling castle by a creepy carriage in the dark. It's actually astounding and beautiful how much Bloodborne owes to Radcliffe. So note her rich language, the focus on darkness and isolation. We've got the solemn duskiness of evening and the solitary reign of the castle itself. This is a sunset scene, which plunges Emily into darkness until all she can see are the castle's clustering towers. As Wright notes, Radcliffe twice invokes the word sublime to describe the castle, indicating to a late 18th century readership who would have known Burke and the sublime that Udolpho, to Emily's eye, is already a location of terror. So we've got the setting. We've also got Emily herself, the young, virtuous heroine who is regularly overcome by her emotions. She's often forced to rest, to recover breath and composure. There's lots of swooning in Gothic literature. She has a strong imagination that often increases her feelings of fear. A sudden chillness ran through her frame. She looked fearfully upon the duskiness of her chamber, and the dead silence that prevailed there heightened to her fancy its gloomy aspect. At length, she left the casement, but her steps faltered as she approached the bed, and she stopped and looked around. The single lamp that burned in her spacious chamber was expiring. For a moment, she shrunk from the darkness beyond. Emily is being constantly pursued by horrific men about a terrifying castle, so I think experiencing bouts of terror is more than reasonable. And her overactive imagination isn't necessarily a flaw. As Wright tells us, it serves her well in many respects, alerting her to the dangers that await her. It's not simply that Gothic swooning and fainting is a sign of weakness. She's also an intrinsically good character. She's an obedient daughter, remains faithful to Valancourt, and although she succumbs to feelings of fear, acts on her reason and exhibits great bravery. At one point, Montoni threatens Emily to sign away all her property to him, but she refuses and stands her ground. I am not so ignorant, Signor, of the laws on this subject as to be misled by the assertion of any person. The law, in the present instance, gives me the estates in question, and my own hand shall never betray my right. Your credulity can punish only yourself, and I must pity the weakness of mind which leads you to so much suffering as you are compelling me to prepare for you. You may find, perhaps, Signor, said Emily with mild dignity, that the strength of my mind is equal to the justice of my cause, and that I can endure with fortitude when it is in resistance of oppression. There's a real trope in contemporary horror films that if someone's going to survive, it's the virginal, intelligent female lead. The Cabin in the Woods does a great job of exploiting this, as the stock characters, the athlete, the whore, the scholar and the fool, are all pegged for certain death, but the virgin is allowed to survive. Spoilers, by the way. As you can see, this stock character has its roots in Radcliffe and the Gothic. So we've got the scary castle, the innocent yet bold heroine, and Radcliffe's novel draws on other features we might deem especially Gothic, like the suggestion of the supernatural, dusty old manuscripts, hidden chambers, skeletons, murder mysteries, rusty daggers, winding corridors, dark and lonely nights. All these tropes might sound overdone, or even silly, but Radcliffe uses them to create a real creeping sense of terror, rooted in the sublime. And more than this, many of her novels can be read as astute commentaries on everything from politics to religion to patriarchy. The Gothic, it would seem, is a genre that has the potential to be both trashy and gimmicky, and sensitively aware to the darkness that drives us. Unnerving tales like Radcliffe's were incredibly popular, especially during the 1790s, but this kind of literature wasn't to everyone's taste. Take this unfavourable critique written in 1797. It is perhaps full time that some attempt should be made to recall writers to the old boundaries of common sense. I allude principally to the great quantity of novels with which our circulating libraries are filled and our parlour tables covered, in which it's been the fashion to make terror the order of the day, by confining the heroes and heroines in old gloomy castles full of spectres, apparitions, ghosts and dead men's bones. This anonymous writer believes that these stories are so prevalent as to be hurtful to the youthful readership consuming them so avidly. They believe a novel ought to be morally instructive and useful to its reader, and mockingly concludes their brief article with the following recipe that female readers desirous of catching the season of terrors can follow. Take an old castle, half of it ruinous, a long gallery with a great many doors, some secret ones, 3 murdered bodies, quite fresh, as many skeletons in chests and presses, an old woman hanging by the neck with her throat cut, assassins and desperados, noises, whispers and groans, 70 at least. Mix them together in the form of 3 volumes to be taken at any of the watering places before going to bed. What this reviewer and their colourful recipe tells us is how far these Gothic tropes were so ingrained in the public imagination by the late 1790s. Fast forward centuries, and almost all of them, or certainly variants of them, appear in books like this. Radcliffe, in particular, did so much to popularise the kind of literature that would lead to this, as well as, of course, more sophisticated scary narratives. So, next time you delight in a frightening film or find an alarming sense of glee reading a spooky tale by candlelight, you can thank Radcliffe for your pleasure. But did Radcliffe's meteoric rise to fame and extensive influence as a writer come at a cost? In the throes of success, as her career reached new heights and as her audience blossomed, Radcliffe suddenly and mysteriously disappeared from the public eye for over 20 years. Where did she go? How did she respond to and cope with her own dramatic rise to fame? Was she driven mad by her own indulgence in the pleasure of terror? Investigate the mystery that is Anne Radcliffe's life by watching the next video here.